Indiana Arts Commission, Arts in the Parks and Historic Sites 2019 Advisory Review Panel, Organizations 2. I'm Jen Perry, Commissioner from Terre Haute. Today is November 7th, and we are meeting by conference call and streaming live from a webinar. We welcome new applicants who may be listening in today and would like to remind you that you are muted for this review. There is no direct contact or conversation about the evaluation and disposition of applications, before, during, or after the panel meeting. At this time, we'd like the panelists and staff to introduce themselves, stating their name, occupation, and where they are from in the state. We'll start with Evie.
Hi, I'm Evie Kirkwood. I'm Director of St. Joseph County Parks in the northern part of the state here in South Bend, Indiana.
Ann.
Hi, I'm Ann Laker, the Director of Communications at the Indiana Forest Alliance. We're a statewide organization.
Jeannie.
I'm Jeannie Regan-Dinius. I'm a historian for the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology.
Callie.
I'm Callie McCune. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator over at the Indiana Historical Society. We're a statewide organization, but I'm based out of Indianapolis.
Richard.
I'm Richard Day. I retired in May as the historian at the Vincennes State Historic Sites, a part of the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites. I'm still, however, a member of the local Historical Society.
Great. And Anna and staff?
I'm Anna Tragesser, Artist and Community Services Manager at the Indiana Arts Commission. And
Deanna Polsma, IAC staff at the Indiana Arts Commission.
Great. All right, now we'll begin the panel review. This is how the process is going to work. I'll announce the application we will review and ask the first reader to begin the discussion. The first reader will provide their assessment of the application based on the evaluation criteria and their perspective. Panelists, please note that the applications do not need to be recapped since everyone has read it. Just provide your comments. After the first reader is finished, I'll ask the second reader to present any new, additional, or opposing comments. We are not looking for consensus, just a full evaluation from the different perspectives panelists bring to the table. After the second reader has finished, I'll open the discussion for final comments. Remember, in the interest of time, we are only looking for new, additional, or opposing viewpoints. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, that panelist will be placed on hold while the application is reviewed. Finally, once the application has been reviewed by the full panel, we ask the panel to update their scores in the online system.
Sorry, Jen,
yeah?
Could you say that one more time?
Which part? Just the online application?
Yes.
Well, finally, once the application has been reviewed by the full panel, we ask the panel to update their scores in the online system. It is common for scores to change as a result of the broader discussion. These scores save automatically. Are there any questions? Can you hear me okay, Anna?
Yes, actually, I think it's our internet here, so I'm going to dial in just in case, but you're good.
Okay, great. If there aren't any questions, let's begin. So we're going to start with the application from Arts for Learning, and the first reader is Evie. Thank you, Evie.
Thank you. This project partner has successfully implemented a similar project at 2 other state parks in previous years. And it's a multifaceted project, and it appeared through the application that they were going to tailor those projects to 2 existing events at Mounds State Park. And what I think is a strong part of this application is because they have had past success, they are also interested in moving those events to new locations. And the applicant clearly indicated that they had already worked closely with the park naturalist to tailor activities to the park needs and their interest, which was very good. There was a clear budget and a very thorough letter of support, which was helpful. I thought they did a good job of highlighting the relevance of the project to the site. And then again, as I mentioned, tying it to existing park events, and that there will be a strong partnership there. And it also combines natural and historical based activities that relate to the site. So that was a plus. They reference working with the naturalist to design specific offerings, and the ideas such as yoga movements that mimic animals in the park or storytelling are interactive, and so that's a strong selling point. They're also going to create, on the historical side, some replica Pioneer toys and bookmaking, and that will tie into their Pioneer Days event. So again, I thought there was evidence of a strong partnership with the park site. They did talk quite a bit about activities at past sites, and I presumed that was to share how the applicant tailors the projects to the site. They are pretty much relying on the park's accessibility features. I didn't really see any specific effort to engage underserved groups, but they did have a clear marketing plan with specific strategies to communicate to potential audiences outside of the park. So that's good, trying to draw new people into the park. And they did appear to heed the naturalist's advice to work on engaging wider audiences rather than an emphasis on preschool programs, which was apparently their original focus. And so I thought it was interesting that the applicant was willing to make some adjustments. It appears that there'll be a variety of options for park visitors to explore the arts and historical aspects of the site. And so this really is, rather than one unified project, it's a palette of activities. I did note that 16% of the grant request in terms of funding will go towards project administration, including towards the salaries of 3 Arts for Learning staff. It did have evidence of using professional artists in the project. And I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Evie. Second reader, Jeannie, do you have any new, additional, or opposing comments to add?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I agree that this is a grant with a lot of moving parts, but the staff seems capable of doing that. My one concern is that being at like mounds, there are no Native artists, Native American artists, a part of this group. I think that would add to a way to represent, to get underrepresented individuals there. And all of the activities are related around the pioneer history, and so the Euro history, and not necessarily the Native American history. And while there's an amazing historic structure there, the reason people go to mounds is because of the mounds itself, which is a pre-contact piece. So I just think it would strengthen their application if they got both some, maybe a Native artist to do some things related to Native American history more than just Euro history. But besides that, that's my only comment.
Okay, great. Are there any other additional new or opposing comments from the group? Hearing none, go ahead and finalize your scores, update your online comments. I'll give you just a second to do that. If you need more time when I come back on, just let me know. We have a lot to get through today, so I'll keep us moving unless I hear you speak up. All right. Let's move on to our second, Auburn Arts Commission. First reader is Anne.
Hi there. Yes, so this is a plein air day happening at the Gene Stratton Porter site. I was very persuaded by their points about this being a rural area with, you know, infrequent access to live arts events, and the fact that anyone living in this area has a pretty far way to go if they want to visit an art museum or a symphony. So this is seeing art being made and live. I was impressed and glad to see a relatively large investment in marketing. So I think they did a great job with looking at creating impact. Their PR plan to kind of penetrate the community with information about this event and encouraging people to participate was excellently planned. allowing people to engage with the artistic and ecological interests of Gene Stratton Porter was very clearly communicated and planned. And they were looking at an intergenerational audience and working hard to achieve that. It was also great in terms of community impact, how the results of this plein air day, both the works of the professional artists and the public, just there with their paint and camera, are going to be displayed at not one but two venues in two nearby counties. So I feel it hit the criteria quite well.
All right, Richard, I have you down as second reader.
Yeah, I concur. It's a interesting first project. It sounds much more experienced than that. I've had experience with this at the TC Steel plein air thing, and this sounds very similar to that, although it'll be up in the far north, which I've never been up that far north, but it sounds like it does engage both senior citizens. It's going to be marketed there, and then also in the local school. So yes, it sounds like a very good project.
Great. All right. Are there any new, additional, or opposing comments from the rest of the group?
This is Evie. I just had a couple of quick comments. I did think they articulated their goals very well. I did note that they did a good job of considering how to invite residents of senior living facilities, which I think is a vastly underserved user group throughout our state, throughout the region. So I appreciated that. I know that Gene Stratton Porter was a pioneer in photography, and I know that I believe that there was a reference to children and then doing some photography, but I wouldn't rule out the opportunity for providing maybe some small easels, outdoor easels, little maybe 4x4 panels where actually children could actually do some plein air painting. It might kind of fit in with the theme of the day of actually doing some hands-on plein air work for kids.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
This is Jeannie. I've just got, I had just a concern about the budget. And so they have like $1,300 for exhibits and not any explanation of why that much money for exhibiting. So I would like to see a more detail on these expenses, because some of them seem very high to me, and perhaps I just don't understand what it is that they were doing. So that's my, and then without naming the professional judge yet, again, I was like, do you have someone in line? And if so, are they going to, are we sure they're able to do that? Because I would hate for you to give the grant and then not have a judge that you're able to. And then they don't discuss if it rains that day. So I just, again, some little detailed things. It's their first time of doing a grant. So some of these detailed things they may have thought about, but just didn't articulate in the grant application.
I agree with Jeannie. I had the rain question in mind. I struggled a bit with their target audience because I felt like their audience looked like they were trying to target everyone. And if people aren't already going to the Gene Stratton Porter site and have never been there before, I feel like having a more targeted audience and plan will help them actually be successful with their marketing instead of just trying to serve everyone and get anyone there. I was also a little bit concerned with who they were selecting as artists. The date for this event is prime art fair season. And so only having the incentive of a prize or prizes under $900 for artists may not be incentive to go to this event and pay an entry fee rather than being able to sell their work. So I think looking at it maybe incorporating a way that the artists can bring revenue in prime season might make it more successful. But I wanted to know more about how they were selecting artists and how they were going to get the word out to them to bring them in.
Okay, any other new, additional, or opposing comments? Okay, hearing none, go ahead and finalize your scores based on the discussion. Update your online comments. And if I don't see a lot of action, we'll just keep on rolling.
Anne, I had manually muted you because you were hearing your phone ring, but I just want you to know that.
I apologize. That was
no, that's okay. That's okay. Just wanted to make sure you had control over it now.
Yes, I do. And is it okay if I just add one comment? I respectfully disagree about the marketing of this event. I felt like they were making a very dedicated effort to reach intergenerational audience, and that was their goal, and they had a strategic plan for doing that. So
thank you, Anne. I apologize for you.
Okay, let's move on to number 3, the Dunes Learning Center. Callie, I have you down as first reader, please.
I felt that this, I don't have a ton of comments on this application. I felt like it was very strong and well thought out. It's obvious that they know their audience. They're well organized. It's a well-planned camp. They've done this years before and provide an excellent experience for youth that wouldn't have the opportunity to be out in this scenario or into the environment outside of it, and that they serve their audience well and ask them the questions and evaluate them appropriately and evaluate how they're evaluating that. I think the only place I struggled is that they give a very strong overview of the Mighty Acorns camp, but they could make it stronger as to what was actually happening in this Arts in the Park day. I found that the budget just told me that they were going to use the grant money within how the camp spent its money, but not specifically how that was broken out. And so I would have liked to see a more detailed budget to know exactly how they're going to spend this grant money, and maybe a little more attention on the actual impact and evaluation to the day in the park rather than the overall camp evaluation. But otherwise, I found it very strong and fit the criteria very well.
Great. I'm going to open it up to the entire group now for additional comments, new comments, or opposing comments.
This is Evie. I have a few comments about this one. Again, this is, as Kelly mentioned, this is something that they've done in the past. I recall that in past years, the art projects were pretty similar sounding, the Mandala project and the Sand Candle project. And so one question is that a repeat activity, or will repeat campers want to do the same activity again? And that's just something that I remember from seeing this application in previous years. And then I want to make sure that campers are respectfully collecting materials or not collecting materials from the site for the mandala. And I also wonder if they can make a better connection with making sandcastles and what that has to do with the children's understanding of the dunes and the dunes ecosystem. So I want to make sure that there's a good, strong connection between the natural history and the art project. A couple other things. It's really, the grant is that they've applied for is to fund 2 days of art activities. And the campers do pay a subsidized registration fee to participate in the week. The evaluation from the park naturalist expressed that it would be nice to somehow offer activities to general park visitors. So that made me think that this is it almost feels like an exclusive activity just for the campers, which I understand. That's kind of the goal of the project. Although these particular art activities could happen at the National Lakeshore, where the camp is actually physically held. So part of me said, okay, maybe they're using this grant to be able to fund some activities just by busing the kids out to the state park. So that's why I have such a strong feeling about, can the art activities tie to the natural history of the site? Just to give it broader appeal. And then again, because it's only designed for the campers, is there any way to have the public, visiting public, either see on display some of the activities that the children create, just some way to broaden the impact, the public impact of this particular project.
Okay, thanks, Abby. Anyone else? New, additional, or opposing comments? Anyone?
I was just hopeful that some of these activities were literally designed to build artistic skill. You know, it's wonderful to create something like a candle, but are we reaching high for artistic skill?
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you for everyone for participating in the comments. Please finalize your scores. Go ahead and update your online comments. Give me just a moment here.
Thank you, everyone. You're doing an excellent job. Just a reminder to, especially when you're scoring, make sure that you are only making decisions based on what you know from this application.
Great. Okay, let's move on to number 4, Family Folklore Foundation. And I have Jeannie as the first reader, please.
Yes. So this project it seems like a good idea, but I had some concerns with it. I think the budget doesn't cover all of the aspects of it. Like there's no line item for the creation of the newscast. And so they need to add some of those things. From the beginning, I didn't understand the description of there would be camping. And then when I finally got to my understanding, so I have how many nights, how many students, and where are the chaperones or adults? You can't just have 4 artists or 5 artists and, you know, I don't know how many kids out there camping. You need to have chaperones. And when you get into camping, then you get into some issues that they don't cover of how they're going to deal with adults camping with children. So I think that's a concern they need to. They may have it figured out, but they did not resolve that in the grant application. So that is an issue. The camping, once I finally understood that, is a site impact, and they didn't, they need to, I'd like to see them talk about maybe engaging the kids in cleaning up from the camp and stuff like that, just to make sure that the kids know that camping does impact nature, and you need to, and how to handle that in an appropriate way. So that it's not a negative way. And I do, and it will engage people in the parks, and I think that's great. They don't discuss that they're going to do an underserved population, but I think from my understanding of some of the description of their organization, I think they will be reaching an underserved population. I still think they did a good job of explaining that, so some more detailed about that, even some statistics about their community would, I think, go a long way in helping to show that they're, reaching a group that way. And so this group has done things. They understand the marketing, so I was happy about that. My major concern, though, is this camping aspect of it, and that they really don't have, I don't think, enough chaperones and enough adults, and then how do you deal with adults and things like that dealing with children. So those are my concerns. I think that would improve this application. Because again, if they've got it figured out, they just didn't explain it in the application.
Sure. Okay. Anne, would you like to add any additional new or opposing comments?
Yes, thank you, Jeannie. I I was concerned as well about the newscast and kind of understanding, well, what is the artistic substance of that? What specifically are how will creating a newscast be an artistic experience? Also, in the artistic documentation piece, it was a flyer from a previous presentation, and I was hoping for a little more with a piece like that in terms of it communicating how this project, why people should care, in other words, and making it more attractive. So I had that concern as well.
Okay. I'd like to open it up to the group. Are there any other additional, new, or opposing comments?
I also had questions about the magazine that they were putting out, which didn't seem to be actually in their budget. And so unless it was being grouped in somewhere else, I didn't understand what the scope of that was, how big, and then how they were actually going to produce that.
And I just have on the same theme, I couldn't determine from the narrative if all the aspects of the project were open to all ages, or some for adults, some for kids. Do people have to pre-register? Do they sign up for a whole set of activities or season activities? So I think the common thread here is that there are many, many components: overnights, bike rides, radio presentation, magazine, puppet shows, school visits to the park. And I think the application would be strengthened if it was a little more focused. And the one concern I had is it sounded as if the project participants will join in already existing naturalist programs at the park. And I wasn't sure if that had been communicated to park staff.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, hearing no additionals, let's go ahead and finalize scores and update comments based on any new information you've heard.
Again, thank you so much. You guys are so thorough and really appreciate all of this feedback. It's going to make things stronger. It is also helpful to share the parts of the application that you felt like were really strong, that they did a really great job in. Very helpful to hear both of those, so thank you.
I will say that this project appears to have pretty enthusiastic support from the Dune staff.
Mm-hmm. Good observation. All right, let's go ahead and move on to number 5, Friends of Charleston State Park. And Richard, I have you down as first reader, please.
All right. This is Rose Island, which is on the Ohio River, and they propose to take this 10 by 10 canvas and in 4 separate events have the people paint histories of 4 different aspects of Rose Island's history. One of the items that they're going to procure is a 10 by 10 canvas. And then they were talking about 4 separate events, and I was wondering, they didn't make it clear whether they were going to divide the canvas up, I presume, into 4 canvases, each 5 feet by 5 feet, and then they go on to say something about the visitors will be able to take the artwork home. And I wasn't quite sure how they would decide which visitors would be able to take this artwork home. Since they're drawing apparently on a diverse population, would they arm wrestle for it, or would they vote for it, or how would you decide who would take home this 5 by 5 piece? And then it seems to me that once these pictures are completed, maybe they could have some way of displaying it somewhere before it is sent home to the people. These were all things that I was interested in having elucidation about. That having been said, I have actually been down there. It's an interesting location, and this is a way of getting the people to be involved in the history of Rose Island. And that's what I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Callie, do you have additional new or opposing comments?
I found the passion for history really came through in this application, and they did a lovely job for someone, I'd never heard of Rose Island, and now I want to go check out this amusement park on an island that you can only get to from a bridge. So I felt they painted that very well, but I struggled with understanding some of their logistical pieces and sort of the goals of the project. I think they got caught up in telling us this history, and I think they thought through a lot of the pieces, and it just didn't quite come through in the grant application. Because when I was reading it at the beginning, especially sort of in the what are the project goals portions, because I was making comments like it'd be great to include a park naturalist or historic images as you're painting this picture of what it looked like. And then as I read further, it looked like they were going to do that. So I think just being a little clearer in that overall goal would make this stronger.
Great. Anyone else in the group? New, additional, or opposing comments?
Oops. Yeah, this is Evie. I have a couple of things. I really appreciated the fact that they articulated in their application that they attempted to coordinate events last year and they had to cancel them. And they were really straightforward and upfront about that, but it obviously proved to be a learning opportunity for them to be better prepared with committee structure and thinking about some of the logistics like registration fees. Which were challenging for families. That said, I would have liked to then have seen a little more clarity about how they would do registration, email, phone, PayPal, or some of the things that they mentioned. But I did think that many campers may not find out about this activity until they arrive at the park. So that may be a little challenging. They might have to take reservations at the nature center. So very, very minor, but I wanted to think about that. And also think about in case of rain, is there an option to be undercover for something like this? The other thing that they talked about for a children's activity, I believe, was painting rocks. And for many folks in the nature education field, that is not activity that typically we'd like to promote. It takes rocks out of the environment. They're an important abiotic component of habitats. And then if they're placed back outdoors when they're painted, that can introduce toxic pigments. So maybe the kids could do mini canvases, or maybe there could be a canvas with an outline of the historic structures in the park, and then the kids could fill that in. Or maybe they could do walking sticks, paint walking sticks or something. The property manager did provide a letter of support, and so I thought that was helpful. And again, on the logistics, it sounded like tables and chairs would be rented. So I'm assuming that frees the park staff and maybe the volunteers from setup and transporting furniture. It's just something I always think of as a park person myself, is what actually is the park staff going to have to do. So again, enthusiastic project, would just love to see a little more clarity in some of the logistics.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and finalize scores, update online comments. Give you just a second here. And we will roll right into Friends of the Upper Wabash Interpretive Services. And Evie, if you don't mind being first reader for us on this one.
Sure. Give me a second here to bring that one up.
Yep, of course.
Okay. I thought this application provided delightful documentation of last year's successes. And sometimes what we forget about, which is a very worthy goal when friends groups are involved, friends groups that are helping to promote the park, that they were excited that new visitors came to the site, but they also were able to welcome 2 new Friends members, and that's a great thing. Most of the artwork shops that they talk about make general reference to the park site, which is good, and it provides artists a venue and the public a chance to interact with the artists and maybe learn a new art technique. Didn't sound like there would be a lot of impact to the site, shelter rental use. The other strong aspect of this application was that the workshops are offered during off-peak months in the park, and that helps draw visitors to the park and potentially new visitors to the park, which I thought was helpful. And I also appreciated the fact that the Friends have designed a plan to promote the January workshops in case grant notification is not received by then. So they were thinking ahead, which is great. And I thought the budget was clear and well articulated. Let's see, I talked about growing the Friends group. It seemed to me that it was a set of high quality art experiences spread out over a significant period of time. I do think a couple of them might be able to connect the participant with the park and its natural history a little bit better, thinking about the natural resources. Perhaps if the artist and the naturalist could work together well in advance. The narrative did state that the park interpreter would provide a short introduction at the start of the workshops. But for example, for the felt owl program, maybe the naturalist at Salamone could provide taxidermied specimens and talk about just very briefly about native owls to look for. And they may be planning to do that, but for me, I'm always about let's do great art and let's make sure it fits with the site. Similarly with the dragonflies and the copper cuff and the oil diffuser activity, that one seemed a little more of a stretch to connect to the natural history of the site. So maybe think about that. But one way to do it is maybe have participants have the ability to smell some different scents that are out in nature. Pawpaw trees, spice bush trees, when you scratch them, they have a really strong smell. So maybe that's a way to kind of connect the oil diffuser activity. And I liked that they were referencing multi-generational families that participated last year, and even a few who participated with limited mobility, which I appreciated those comments. And I think this is a great activity to grow this Friends group. They're building on their past experience. One other suggestion, there might be a way to exhibit some of the finished projects in a sort of art show at the Nature Center at the close of all the workshops. That might be fun to bring all the artists and all the participants back together for some kind of little social activity, but also allow the general public to see some of the work. So those are my comments.
Great. And I'd like to open it up to the group now. Is there any additional new or opposing comments, please?
I noticed in the budget that they are appropriating funds for park admissions, and I wasn't entirely sure if that's the best possible use of Arts Commission funding, but maybe that's a cut and dried answer. It must be allowed. I don't know. I assume it's allowed if it's here, but.
Yep. I can provide some clarity on that. It is an allowable expense, and it is up to you to provide some feedback on that, whether you feel like it's appropriate or make suggestions for how you as the public would rather see those funds used.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a concern with that because I understand for some of the rental fees that it's costing to set up the tables and clean up an extra, clean up for that, but then also to get people in the door and so, or into the park. And so I think some of the registration fees could be reduced if you weren't, because weren't spending the money on the park fees. And I don't know if these registry, I don't do a lot, I'm going to be honest, I don't do a lot of art classes, so I don't know if these fees are what you normally pay and you expect, but I think if you reduce some of the fees, then the underserved population could then maybe pay for it or be a part of it and things like that. I know they've got some free registrations and stuff like that for some of the classes, but I thought, if you reduced the entry fee, then it could go to reducing the registration fees, and I think it would improve.
I really appreciate that they had such success with their prototyping and they were looking to broaden it. But it seemed to me a huge jump to go from one artist who offered the class multiple times to 7 different artists and classes. I don't know if that's just me, but it seemed like a really large undertaking. And I sort of felt like maybe, and I didn't know if that first artist, if it was like the zeitgeist of that artist who was just really, and the topic they were offering that was really something that people engaged with. So I kind of was encouraging to maybe offer less artists to really get your hands around those logistics and then look to broaden it in future years.
Anyone else? All right, hearing none, let's go ahead and finalize scores and update online comments, please. And again, interrupt me or let me know if you need a little more time. Otherwise, we will keep rolling. And moving on to the Greater Clark County Schools. And Anne, I have you down as first reader on this one, please.
Yes, so here we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, about 110 of them, coming on a field trip from Clark County to Floyd County, where the Culbertson Mansion is. So this is essentially a field trip, and there was, in terms of impact, I think they did a good job communicating how the fact that the most frequent visitors to this historic site are people in that county, and it's exciting to imagine students from a nearby county who've never been there. So the artistic experience is painting a tile and learning about the architectural patterns and styles of the mansion. And there's an artist to facilitate that, of course. I was interested in their efforts to make a leap between, creating a tile, in the architectural style, drawing from the symbolism of the decor of the mansion, and the emotional lives of the students. I worked hard to kind of understand how that was going to happen, and they did their best to communicate it. Generally, though, I felt like they were doing a good job describing how they were going to engage students with the architecture and history of the mansion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anne. Evie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. I did think this was well thought out, as Anna already mentioned. The budget was clearly articulated, although I wasn't clear. There were a couple of items in there, coloring books and a set of famous artist books, and I wasn't sure how those were going to be used, as well as an entire carton of copy paper, which is a lot of copy paper. So I wasn't clear about how that was going to be used. Let's see, I had a couple other comments here. I think Anna mentioned all of that. I did think they made an interesting case for considering high achiever elementary students as an underserved population. Not something traditionally that we think of, but I think they were making a case that sometimes high achiever students kind of get drawn down to perhaps a lower level of opportunity and experiences. So I thought that was interesting. But I did like the fact that they were going to be able to do a display of the completed tiles at the site so that it would provide opportunities for others in the community and potentially for families of the students who participated to come back to the site, because I think that's an important goal for this project. And as Anna mentioned, the Culbertson site is underserved by outside groups. I also thought that they made a clear point about doing a pre and post survey. And so hopefully that will provide them some insight should they decide to alter things in the future or pursue things differently in the future. I thought that was great. They really don't need to promote the project to obtain participants. But obviously, if there's a way to share those final works even through social media as well, that I think would be helpful for other people in the community to see the results of the project.
And I think they said they were going to do that, I believe.
Yep, I think so. Yep.
I guess in looking at this, you always hope that more people could be reached. I mean, I don't think we have a formula that we can afford to spend $10 to reach each person or whatever. But it's not a huge group of people, but it's a really planned experience.
Sure. Anyone else have any new additional or opposing comments to add? Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and finalize scores, update comments. Take just a second here. And we will roll right into our 8th one, Partnerships for Lawrence. And Evie, I've got you down as first reader.
Evie, you are muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This project seemed to have a sound history and offered a well-attended event at Fort Harrison in the past. So the applicant has a track record of completing this, which is always helpful. They provided a clear description of what would take place during the workshop, which was helpful. And I thought there was a very good timeline. And they mentioned that based on an evaluation from the previous year, that they were going to make accommodations for increasing the number of participants. And there were excellent adjustments for a registration based on past experience and assessment of their last year events. So that shows to me, at least, that they're really thinking about what they did last year and how to continue to improve. They did note that they were trying to determine about charging a registration fee that might be reimbursed at the event. As with many park programs, when you offer a free program or a very low cost program, sometimes people sign up and then they don't show, and then you know that you could have reached other participants who weren't able to sign up because technically it was full. So, another way to do it is you overbook the workshops and then you run the risk that everyone will show and then you're kind of scrambling. So I know they're kind of struggling with that, but I appreciate that the fact that they were at least thinking about it. A couple of things on the budget I was curious about 25% of the grant was for administrative support, writing and mailing an existing newsletter. Might be a little high, or maybe I just needed more detail about how that directly tied to the impact of this particular project. Again, $200 for refreshments at the Toast of the Arts. They noted that the wine would be donated, so again, might be something that if we understood a little better how that money was going to be used, that would be helpful. The evaluation provided by the park naturalist suggested that there be a brief overview of the natural history of the site to provide an orientation to the park. And the naturalist offered to do that, which is great. I think that will foster a better understanding and connection to the natural landscape. that the artists will be working in. And there is evidence, though, obviously, that the applicant discussed plans with the park staff. They're going to rent a shelter. It seems like there's going to be minimal impact to the park site, which is great. They noted that the completed paintings will primarily be on display at the theater at the Fort Toast the Arts event. And there might be other public places that the works could be displayed. And I wasn't sure if the amateur and the youth works maybe would be included in the Toast the Arts event. Maybe some of the other panelists picked up on that. I wasn't sure if that was just going to be for the professional artists or the amateur and youth works. Or maybe the amateur and youth works could be displayed at the Park Nature Center, which would be great fun. And it sounded like they were going to work on getting more professional artists to participate, but it did sound like the teaching artist had a strong background in teaching, which I found very helpful. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie, second reader, please.
I have to agree with Evie, and I'm not gonna, there's nothing more for me to add because I think she covered it quite nicely, so.
Great. Anyone else have additional, opposing, or new comments to add? All right. I'll give you just a minute to finalize your scores, update your online comments. As always, interrupt if you need a few more minutes. Otherwise, we'll keep rolling on to number 9, the Prairie Arts Council. And Callie, I have you down as first reader on this one.
Yeah, I felt like this application presented a really robust day of art in the Tippecanoe State Park. And they've obviously had success over doing it for 3 years. And I think where I struggled was as a new reader coming to this, to the project, I was missing a lot of details that I think that they might have skimmed or summarized over because they've applied multiple times. And so I wanted further details on how it was going to be managed and the logistics, especially with artist selection and how they decided between demonstrations and workshops. I think it's things they already do and think about, but they think the application would be stronger if some of those details were included. A couple of like minor things, the budget described how the grant money would be spent, but then in the project summary, they said that the grant only covered some of the artist costs, but that wasn't clear in the project budget. So more details on the total cost of the event and how they're supplementing that, if they are. It might have just been me over reading something. And then I wanted to know a lot more about their audience and capacity. Again, it sounds like it's been really successful, but if this is something you're doing for your 4th year, I would expect that you would have evaluation data, you'd know how many people you're expecting, and really have a clear picture of what your audience is that you could articulate in the grant application, and I found that a little lacking.
Okay, thanks, Callie. Anne, do you have any additional new or opposing comments to add?
Yes, I would encourage this applicant to kind of go further with ideas about marketing, just kind of a theme with me. I feel like there's a lot more opportunity to have a plan that reaches people beyond simply emailing their own members. Now, again, maybe it's because, if this is going on during a busy park weekend, marketing isn't needed, but I feel like, why not? Why not try to reach new people with this program?
Great. Thanks, Anne. Does anyone else in the group have any additional new or opposing comments?
Does anybody recall, I scribbled a little note on a piece of paper and now I'm going back to look. Was this another application that had stone painting as one of the kids' activities? Anybody remember that?
Yes.
Did it, Anne?
Yes, I see
Okay.
that here.
Okay. So again, you heard my comments from the previous application. That's just one where I just have a little bit of angst. It encourages removal of rocks and stones from habitats and alters them with paint. So that's, to me, perhaps something that maybe could be rethought.
Sure. Okay, anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and finalize scores. Update your comments with any new information from the discussion. And we will keep rolling. Ripley County Tourism Bureau is our next applicant. And Richard, if you wouldn't mind being our first reader on this one.
All right, this is at Versailles State Park. And this is outdoor painting again and photography of wildlife and cake decorating using leaves and flower motifs. I thought the budget was realistic and certainly some pretty good advertising budgeted for the thing. It's in April, so it's designed to get people into the park before the full season begins. And it has community involvement. Yes, it's looks to me to be a good project.
Okay. At this point, I'll open it up to the general group to go ahead and add any new, additional, or opposing comments.
I have a good and a bad. So I like that they use past surveys, and so it shows that they're kind of their clients and who's coming to these events to broaden it. I think that's excellent and shows that they're working to make sure that this is a successful thing. So I think that's a strong positive. Their artists are not identified, and so I'm concerned if the budget is fair. I don't know if $1,400 is enough money for these artists. Now, since they've done it in the past, they probably know that money, but without having, again, those people identified and confirmed on how much they're going to cost and how much they're going to charge, I just want to make sure that they have enough money in their budget for all of those artists.
And then I just have a couple of short additional comments. I liked the fact that from their past projects, they realized that they should modify the time slot for the workshop designed for children. So again, they're building on their past successes. There's a comment about so much interest in the past workshops pertaining to the buildings on the site. And that apparently was very well received. So maybe there could be an art-related activity incorporated that somehow ties to the CCC or the Civilian Conservation Corps, since that was mentioned in the application. Something like wood carving or art using design themes of CCC posters or plein air painting of the buildings. Again, that would help tie it to the historical site. The one other thing, I know they mentioned that they're going to use Facebook, et cetera, to kind of help promote. And I always encourage folks to share pictures of the finished works in Facebook. I did think the artist documentation photos that they did provide was helpful.
Great, thanks. Anyone else?
I would encourage thinking possibly beyond cake decorating or Just working on the artistic substance here.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none. Let's go ahead and finalize scores. Update online comments based on the discussion. Give me just a second.
In this next application, Callie's declared a conflict of interest. So Callie, I'm going to put you in the waiting room and we'll let you back in when we're done with this application. Okay, ready.
Okay, great. Moving on to Storytelling Arts of Indiana. First reader on this one is Jeannie.
Yes. So I think the timeline was great on this. The project is small enough, even though it serves 2 parks. I think the project is small enough, and they've expressed, their timeline, I think, well. And I like that it does serve 2 different parks. I think that's a nice way to handle different people into different styles of parks, things like that. Again, without the storytellers being identified, I'm assuming that the amount that they are offering these individuals is fair. But I also wonder, do the storytellers know that they're going to be donating some time, because that's a part of the budget. So that is just, again, if they have these artists already determined, even a letter of support or something from that artist saying, yeah, I'm going to donate that time would be good. I did not clear where the stories are going to come from. I assume they're coming from the parks, but I just want to know how they're kind of a clarification on how they're identified, if the naturalists are coming up with these. The parks have a historian on staff, and I don't know if they realize that, but Ben Clark is the state park historian, and so he could probably offer some additional stories or additional information to help out with that. I think that this will engage the audiences a lot. I think they'll have a lot of fun with it. They mentioned that they are serving an underserved population, but just because storytellers doesn't reach that community doesn't mean that they are underserved. So I would like to see how they kind of determine these underserved communities. And it seems like they're really focusing on their members, which would be great to get their members to the park, but they're not focusing as much on the kind of the general public to come to visit the park, and then also to be introduced to this organization for future events. They said the state's going to create flyers and print them, but it's not in the budget. So either is that a cash thing from the state or kind of an in-kind from the state, or is there money coming from someplace else? Again, I think it sounds like a fun event and something that would be kind of fun to do. Some of these small things that they may have thought of, they just need to speak clearer in their application so that it's clear to us as we're reading it for the first time.
Great, thanks, Jeannie. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the entire group at this point.
I have a couple of things that are fairly similar to what Jeannie said. There was some discussion in their application about that the stories, again, wouldn't necessarily be site specific because not all the storytellers have experiences in those exact parks, which I understand. I would certainly encourage the storytellers to make sure that they are at least park related. I think I picked up in one of the evaluations comments that one of the stories in the past didn't seem to have any tie to a park at all. So I would consider that. And then I think there's an opportunity here to acknowledge Indiana's heritage in storytelling and the role of storytelling in sharing Indiana history, to explain the artistic significance of the project and the artistic significance of storytelling in general.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Anything to add? New, additional, or opposing? Okay, great. Go ahead and finalize your scores. Let's update our online comments based on the discussion. And as always, if you need more time, let me know. And if not, Richard, our next one is the Davinci Pursuit, and I have you down as the first reader.
Sorry, give me just a second. I'm going to let Callie back in. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry.
All right, Callie, are you back with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you.
All right, Kelly, we're moving on to the Davinci Pursuit, and Richard is our first reader on that one.
All right, the Davinci Pursuit. This is the Falls of the Ohio State Park, and they're going to have 5 temporary literary art installations and new original poetry relating to it and all. I think it's a great idea to get the artists and these poets involved. I looked at some of the examples they provided, and they were pretty impressive. I wonder why, though, these plaques have to be temporary. If they're really very good, I would think the park would maybe want to have them all the time to connect people to the river. And then they talk about having maybe one field trip with about 20 people to walk around. And I wonder why they wouldn't have more than one hike or field trip to look at these signs. It seems with all this effort that would be something that you'd want to share with even more people. I've been to the Falls of the Ohio State Park, and it seems to be fairly busy the times I've been there. And I would think there would be enough people available to do these kind of tours. But it seems like a pretty good idea to me.
I can clarify, maybe, I'm not sure if this was something you were questioning, but it has been in the past, and at some sites they've been very specific that there are to be no permanent installations. So you should still score and review based on what you see in the application, but that could be something they're working with.
Wonder why they're opposed to that.
Okay. Jeannie, would you like to
I would love
be our
to.
second reader?
Yes. All right. So I think that, again, it's the time frame seems good. The goals seem great. Again, the poets haven't been chosen, so I could always question budgets when you don't know who you're getting and how much you'll be giving them. My biggest concern has to do with the installation. If they are digging holes, this is state property and state funds, and so you're going to have to do a review through the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology, maybe. And so if that is a part of the review, that's going to take time. That's going to be something to put into the timeline and this is a very geologically and archaeologically sensitive area. And so new holes might not be approved to be dug. So that is something that they really need to consider. And then there are any fees related to someone creating that application to do that review. Now, if they put the signs on existing posts, it's not an issue, but they talked about, some new posts and things like that. And that was a very big red flag for me because we don't want to be digging up archaeological sites when we're trying to do poetry. So that's a concern. And so I think the staff at the site parks needs to work with their preservation officer, who again is the historian Clark, to determine whether this undertaking is covered by the rules for DHPA and whether that schedule will impact what they're doing and whether it'll be allowed, things like that. So it's something that they just need to take into consideration. They don't discuss underserved audiences. And so I think that, getting more, that would be a great idea. They don't really have a marketing plan. They're just going to be contact groups around the area. Well, which groups, what area, Kentucky, Indiana, whatever that's going to be. And so that was kind of my 2 big concerns there.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Anyone else have any additional new or opposing comments to add?
I know that the poet hasn't been chosen yet, but I had a question about if their primary audience, as I read the application, was school field trip attendees. Were they taking into consideration reading levels and poetry that was specifically addressed to that audience? And if that's something that they've thought about in past exhibits that they've done.
Oh, another thought occurred to me. What are they going to do with these plaques after they're done with them, if they are temporary? Do they just put them in a storeroom somewhere, or do they display them in the visitor center there at the park, or what?
And then I have just a couple other follow-ups in the budget. I think there's $250 for transportation, and I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to be utilized. And the material for the fabrication of the signs, while that might be a very minute detail maybe to think about considering in the application, I think what several of the panelists here are all saying is, okay, are they going to be sensitive to the site? Are they going to hold up through the season? And as Richard said, would they be something that could be then displayed afterwards in the Nature Center, Visitor Center? The other thing I wanted to comment was, I think there's $200 in the budget for, I think it says signage and web hosting. Web hosting to draw more people in. I guess, I wasn't sure how they were going to promote that website so people would know to go there. And I love the idea of doing that hike. And they did that in the past. I know the naturalist had hoped that there would be more people participating in that hike. So Richard's comment about maybe doing multiple hikes is a good idea, or maybe a workshop where people could sit by the river and write a poem themselves. So that might be another slightly different way to engage visitors. And then they might want to consider some kind of sample sign or a teaser inside the Nature Center that would help explain the project. Because sometimes when we go out to a site now, okay, there's just a bunch of signs with some poetry. I wasn't sure if there was going to be some kind of interface so people would understand what it was that they were seeing. And then maybe people could come back even to the Visitor Center and write a short haiku or something that they could post in the Visitor Center. One thing that I really liked was that the former Indiana Poet Laureate will serve as the curator of the project, and I thought that was a strong selling point. But I did want to make sure that the selected poets will all be from Indiana. That seems like it should be a no-brainer, but I didn't actually see it listed in the application.
Good comments. Anyone else have additional new or opposing comments? Okay, hearing none. Let's go ahead and finalize our scores and update online comments based on the discussion here. And then, Evie, you can just roll right into the next one, the REN Foundation. Evie is first reader.
Somebody's muted. Maybe Evie, is it you?
Yep, I was still bringing up my next application, so I'm good now, thanks. Good. This particular 4-hour workshop sounds like it's going to create an interactive experience for participants. I thought there was a clear itemization of the budget, including in-kind contributions, which I appreciated, although I wasn't clear specifically what artistic supplies would be purchased for $350 other than perhaps writing paper and maybe pens. So a little clarification on that would maybe be helpful. The application clarified that there would be minimal impact to park staff and the site, and they talked about cleaning up after themselves, which as park folks, we always appreciate. I didn't feel like I had a good understanding of what the workshop participants would be doing, because there's talk about writing, but obviously the music and the jazz and the improv. So would they also be dancing or watching dancers? Would they be listening to music? Would they help participate in the improvisational music? So just wasn't quite clear about that. There were several references to using the natural landscape for inspiration. And I'm assuming then that the writing would be relevant to the natural landscape. So somehow it would be good to make sure that participants in the workshop have some kind of overview of what the ecosystems or the landscape is at this particular site. There was mention of the applicants following up with the participants after the workshop to see if they're actually still writing. I don't know how feasible that is. That always sounds like a great idea, and when it works, it's really fun. Wasn't sure what format that might be, if it was an email or a little postcard or something, but interesting idea, but sometimes really challenging to follow up on. Because this is a 4-hour workshop format, I think the marketing will really need to attract visitors or participants into the park just for this activity. So it's not going to be casual visitors. It's not going to be campers who are going to want to allocate 4 hours. The marketing plan does address this, and I thought that was helpful, but I can't stress enough that I think there's going to have to be really some good marketing oomph to get folks to participate in a 4-hour workshop. They do talk about in their application how the audience members with limited mobility could participate. They talk about in the budget hiring dance groups, which is sounded good to me. And then once again, anytime I think of an application like this where the audience and participants is fairly limited, I'm always looking for ways that the project can be shared more broadly with park visitors. So maybe copies of the writings could be displayed at the Nature Center or in a newsletter or on Facebook or on a website or something, just to get a little bit broader appeal. And in general, I thought the application highlighted the benefit of movement, music, and outdoor experiences for public and personal health. There's a lot of talk these days about the benefits of being outdoors for mental health and physical health. So perhaps even using mindfulness, incorporating that into the aspect of the workshop could be something that people will connect with, and highlighting that for the audience throughout the workshop. So I think, no, I found one other thing. A kind of common theme. People are thinking about their marketing, and rarely do they talk about sending out a news release. Again, this one didn't as well. So, in addition to the ideas that they presented, even just sending out a news release or community calendars might help, because this is going to be something that people are going to have to really commit a block of time to. So that adds to the challenge in the marketing.
Great, thanks, Evie. Callie, we've got you down as second reader, please.
I felt like Evie covered most of it. I thought this was an interesting and creative way to have people experience the nature of the park through dance and music. I had a number of, I think where I felt like I could see the application being stronger is articulating that targeted audience. They talk about how they could bring in people that were disabled, but they never articulated who they're trying to target. And if it was families, which is what I think I gathered from the rest of the application, a 4-hour workshop seems like a long time for families. So that was really my big concern. Other than that, I think the only other question I had was, they mention a snack, but it's not in the budget. And then the performers agreeing to an in-kind rehearsal. That was what was in the budget, but they never particularly specified that the performers had agreed to that. And I think my only other place that I think they could clarify more is, where was this occurring in Harrison State Park? Because the idea is that you're inspired by nature, but will you be able to see it from the building that you're in? Are there windows? What is that sort of like? Is it actually outdoors, like in a shelter? I think being able to specify where they were looking to hold it would help. But other than that, I thought it was a creative and interesting idea.
Great, thanks, Callie. Opening it up to the group, is there anyone else that has any new opposing or additional comments?
I feel like I'm a broken wheel, but again, they don't have the artists identified. Like Callie said, they're saying that they're going to do some in-kind, and I think that's a strong concern for me. And then I also have a concern that there's going to be no interaction with the park, because I think where they're holding this is in a building that, again, it's any building that you could be anywhere. And so, like Callie said, of doing something maybe in a shelter would be better, or even outside, would be a stronger thing, because right now I feel like they could have held this at any community center and you'd get the same interaction with the environment. So I think that would be a improvement to their application.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores for the REN Foundation. Update your comments based on our discussion. And I believe that is our last one. So this concludes the Arts in the Park and Historic Sites 2019 Organizations number 2 Advisory Review Panel. Thank you for the participants and the panelists.
Thank you, everyone. If you're a guest in this meeting, the public meeting has ended. So goodbye, have a great day. If you're a panelist and have a few extra moments, I'd love to get your feedback on some of this process. So thank you.